In a landmark decision that is already sending shockwaves through Washington, the Supreme Court has halted the Trump administration's controversial tariffs against Brazil. This ruling marks a pivotal moment in the ongoing debate over the limits of presidential authority, especially when it comes to shaping the nation's economic relationships with the rest of the world. By directly challenging the president's authority to impose sweeping economic penalties under the guise of a national emergency, the court has drawn a clear line in the sand. For years, presidents have used emergency powers to bypass Congress and enact tariffs, but this decision signals a significant shift in the balance of power. The ruling reasserts congressional control over international commerce, making it clear that the power to regulate trade and impose tariffs rests primarily with lawmakers, not the executive branch. This sets a new legal precedent, establishing firmer boundaries for future administrations. By striking down the use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act as a justification for tariffs, the court affirms that only Congress has the constitutional authority to levy import taxes. This decision not only impacts the current administration, but also limits the tools available to future presidents seeking to influence global trade through unilateral action. As a result, this decision forces a comprehensive reassessment of U.S. trade policy. It promises a shift toward more predictable, rules-based engagement with global partners, reducing the uncertainty that has characterized recent trade negotiations and disputes. The administration's aggressive trade strategy now faces both a legal and political reckoning. With the Supreme Court's decision, similar executive measures are under scrutiny, and the broader implications for U.S. economic policy are being hotly debated by lawmakers, business leaders, and international partners alike. The central issue remains: with unilateral tariff power now significantly curtailed, how will the United States adapt its strategies to protect its economic interests on the world stage? The coming months will reveal whether Congress can rise to the challenge and craft a more stable, collaborative approach to international trade, or if new tensions will emerge as the nation redefines its role in the global economy. The Supreme Court's intervention began after President Trump declared a national emergency over Brazil's digital policies and internal politics, framing them as threats to U.S. security. The administration claimed Brazil was undermining American interests and coercing U.S. companies, justifying unilateral action under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. By linking trade grievances to democratic values and human rights, the White House sought to legitimize sweeping economic sanctions without congressional approval. This bold move gambled on judicial deference to presidential authority, a gamble that ultimately failed at the Supreme Court. The emergency declaration rested on three main allegations against Brazil-forced censorship of U.S. tech companies, demands for private user data, and political persecution of former President Bolsonaro. The administration argued that Brazil's actions violated free expression and privacy, creating a hostile environment for American businesses. Demands for user data were framed as a security risk and an overreach by Brazilian authorities. The U.S. also accused Brazil of targeting political opposition, casting the dispute as a defense of democracy and human rights. These claims painted Brazil as a coordinated threat to U.S. interests and international norms. The narrative was crafted to justify invoking emergency powers for tariffs. Ultimately, this legal pretext was essential for the administration's aggressive response. In response, the Trump administration imposed a sweeping 40% tariff on most Brazilian imports, aiming to pressure Brazil into reversing its policies. The tariffs were broad, designed to disrupt supply chains and make Brazilian goods uncompetitive in the U.S. market. The executive order allowed for exemptions on essential goods, but threatened further escalation if Brazil retaliated. U.S. agencies were tasked with monitoring the impact and adjusting strategy as needed. The tariffs immediately disrupted $100 billion in annual trade, raising costs for U.S. importers and threatening Brazilian exporters. The administration's approach was clear use overwhelming economic force to compel change. This maximum pressure strategy marked a new era in U.S. trade policy. The tariffs sparked a swift legal challenge, with businesses and civil liberties groups arguing the president had overstepped his authority under IEEPA. Plaintiffs contended that IEEPA was never meant to enable broad tariffs, a power reserved for Congress. They argued the administration was misinterpreting the law, conflating regulation with taxation. The government countered that regulating commerce includes imposing tariffs, especially during emergencies. The courts faced a pivotal question. Does IEEPA grant the president unilateral tariff power? The outcome would set a precedent for the scope of presidential economic authority. Another key issue was whether Brazil's actions truly constituted a national emergency under IEEPA. Challengers argued the cited grievances, censorship, data, and politics, did not meet the high threshold for emergency powers. They claimed the declaration was a pretext for protectionism, lacking credible evidence of a sudden crisis. The administration insisted the emergency determination was a political question, not for courts to review. Judges wrestled with how much deference to give the president's judgment. The Supreme Court's decision to hear the case signaled its importance for defining the limits of emergency powers. The ruling would clarify whether national emergency has enforceable legal boundaries. The outcome would shape the use of emergency economic powers for years to come. Even with IEEPA blocked, the administration retained other legal tools for imposing tariffs. Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974 allows the U.S. to retaliate against unfair foreign trade practices, as seen in disputes with China. Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962 permits tariffs if imports threaten national security, a term interpreted broadly. These statutes provide established, though procedurally complex, pathways for executive action. The Supreme Court's ruling forces future administrations to use more specific legal justifications for tariffs. The practical effect tariffs may still be imposed, but only through clearer, more accountable legal channels. The legal battle over trade policy simply shifts to new terrain. The Supreme Court's recent decision marks a pivotal moment in American legal and economic history. By setting a binding precedent, the court has clarified the boundaries of presidential authority in trade matters, ensuring that future administrations must operate within the framework of the law. Specifically, the court ruled that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, cannot be used as a tool for imposing unilateral tariffs on imports. This decision reaffirms the constitutional role of Congress in regulating trade, emphasizing that lawmakers, not the president alone, hold the power to shape U.S. trade policy. As a result, the ruling places significant constraints on future presidents, limiting their ability to bypass Congress when enacting protectionist trade measures. The IEEPA can no longer serve as a shortcut for implementing tariffs or other economic restrictions for protectionist purposes. Any new tariffs or trade barriers must now be justified under alternative statutes, such as those specifically designed for national security or anti-dumping, or must receive explicit approval from Congress. This means that the legislative branch will play a more active and transparent role in shaping the nation's trade policies moving forward. The Supreme Court's decision brings much-needed clarity to a contentious and often confusing area of law, providing clear guidelines for both government officials and private businesses. By reducing the risk of sudden, disruptive tariffs, the ruling helps create a more predictable environment for American manufacturers, exporters, and investors. International partners can now have greater confidence that U.S. trade policy will follow established legal procedures, fostering stability and trust in global economic relationships. The court's involvement in this case underscores its vital role as a check on executive power, even in areas traditionally dominated by the president, such as foreign policy and international trade. With these new legal guardrails in place, the United States now has clearer boundaries for how it wields its considerable economic power on the world stage. Ultimately, this landmark precedent will influence every future trade negotiation and dispute, shaping the way America engages with the global economy for years to come. After the Supreme Court's landmark ruling, the United States stands at a pivotal crossroads in shaping its future trade policy. This decision marks a significant moment, not just for lawmakers and policymakers, but for the entire nation as it reconsiders how it engages with the global economy. The current administration now faces the challenge of navigating a far more intricate legal and political landscape. Instead of relying solely on executive authority, leaders must turn to established statutes like Section 301 or 232, or work closely with Congress to craft new trade laws that reflect today's realities. This process will likely require more negotiation, transparency, and public debate than in the past. This shift could foster a new era of bipartisan cooperation, leading to more stable and enduring trade policies. It also places renewed emphasis on diplomacy, encouraging the U.S. to build stronger relationships with its trading partners and allies around the world. For American businesses, the Supreme Court's decision offers a sense of relief from the unpredictability of sudden policy changes. With clearer rules and a more predictable environment, companies can make better long-term investments, plan for growth, and support their workers with greater confidence. For foreign governments, the ruling signals a return to a more predictable, rules-based system of engagement. This could help rebuild trust and encourage more open, fair negotiations on trade agreements and disputes. The Supreme Court's decision makes it clear that presidential power over tariffs is not without limits. It affirms that, even in times of national emergency, executive actions are subject to legal review and must adhere to the rule of law. While the debate between protectionism and free trade is far from over, the legal framework is now more clearly defined. This clarity could help guide future policy decisions and reduce uncertainty for all stakeholders. The key question remains: will this decision pave the way for more thoughtful, collaborative trade policies that balance national interests with global responsibilities? Or will it simply spark a new wave of legal battles over the limits of executive power? Only time will tell, but the path forward is now set on firmer legal ground.